We hear a lot about the law in the readings today, about rules and regulations and commandments, but also about things that are much less significant than commandments, these various traditions that some of the Jews had adopted over time, which Jesus pretty clearly indicates they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with them in themselves. There's nothing wrong with these purifications. The problem is when you do the purifications, you do all the external stuff, and you got nothing in here. When your heart is not in any of it, when it's just an empty ritual. That's the kind of law and rule and regulation that Jesus is criticizing in the gospel. The goal of the law, the goal of the commandments, the goal of the rules that God gives in the scriptures, that God gives through the church, is not that we become good rule followers. That's not the point. The point is that we become saints. What God desires for us is that we become saints. And if there's any period in the life of the church that she desperately needs saints, this is it, right? Given everything that's been happening, we need saints. That's the only response, that's the only thing that we can do as a church, is to become holy. So what Jesus is saying is this is what he's given to us for our own sake, that we might become holy, that we might become saints. If you heard the collect prayer at the beginning of Mass, I want to repeat it again, just to help us understand what the Lord is saying to us today. God of might, giver of every good gift, put into our hearts the love of your name, so that by deepening our sense of reverence, you may nurture in us what is good, and by your watchful care, keep safe what you have nurtured. The Lord desires to deepen our sense of reverence, of respect, you might even say obedience, right, to the law, to the rules that he's given to us, so that he can nurture the gift of his life that he's given to us, so that what is good, namely the life of God that dwells in us since our baptism, can grow and be nurtured by obedience to the law. That's what it means to become a saint, to be so transformed, to be so totally open to God's transformative work in us that he makes us holy. It's not following rules that makes anybody holy. But again, rules, laws, order, all of these things are good. We need order. We need order precisely because we're not ordered, because we're disordered, because there are things in us that are broken, because we tend towards sin. So God gives us order and law to order in us what has been disordered, to set right and to heal what's out of place. So this is the goal of law, the soul, our life, our interior life being properly ordered. Not just the external observance, but having what's inside be in conformity with what we're living, what we're doing. So for example, when God gives the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath day, which we're doing right now by being at Mass on this vigil Mass of Sunday. But Jesus also clearly says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for us. God gives us this not just to give us a rule, but because we need it. Because we need him. We need Jesus, and we need a time in which we can come away and rest with him and be with him and be strengthened by receiving his body and blood. So the law is a good thing when it leads us to God, when it leads us closer to Jesus. The law is not the end in itself. It's not the goal. But it's a good thing when it leads us to Jesus. But if, like the Pharisees, it masks this internal disobedience or rebellion by this exterior perception of being obedient, that's not what God is after. It's given to us so that God can bring order to our disorder. When we say the word disorder, it's implying that something's out of order in me. Anytime that I put something above God in my life, I've taken what should be rightly ordered under him, with God as first, with God being the one who I love with my whole heart and soul and mind and strength above all else. And I've placed it out of order. I've placed something else above God. I've created an idol or a false god, essentially. Or sometimes it's because my love or my desire is directed towards something that's just not good. It's directed towards sin. So anytime that I recognize in myself that I love something to the point where it's actually harmful for me, that's not real love. If I love ice cream so much that I eat a whole gallon, I'm going to regret that decision pretty quickly later on, right? It's going to be harmful for me, and my body is going to pay the price for that. That's not what I've been created for. Food is good, but it's meant to give strength and life to the body, etc., right? We need moral laws for our speech, for our actions, that govern our sexuality and everything we do, because we're disordered. And God, in his desire to save us, desires to make right in us that which is out of place, to rightly direct it to the highest good, which is himself, and which is our true happiness. So, order is a very good thing. And because God loves us even in our disorder, he desires to bring us into order. He gives us law. He gives us the liturgy with its rites and with the certain things that we say, the prayers that we repeat every week, because they form us, because they shape us, because they teach us how to pray. They teach our hearts to be drawn to what is true and good and beautiful, so that we might be rightly ordered towards God, who is our ultimate good. So if you look back on the history of the church, there's been many, especially religious communities, that have created a specific way of ordering their life in the pursuit of God. There's these rules of life that every community lives by. So, for example, the Rule of Benedict is one of the most famous and really the first one in the West, the first law, which governed a way of life in seeking Christ. It governed the life of their monastery, and it basically said, here's what we're going to do, not because these things are the goal in themselves, but because we desire Christ. And we're convinced that these things are going to create a space in our life for God to break in. It's simple in a lot of ways. If I don't pray, I'm not going to experience God. If I don't actually spend time with the Lord, if I don't actually seek him, I'm not going to experience God. Certainly God is God and he can do anything, and he finds ways to break into our life, right? But above all, we have to be open to him. We have to seek him and allow him to work. So if my life is so disordered and chaotic that I can't spend time in prayer, I'm probably not going to get much closer to God. So to have some kind of structure to life is actually a very good thing. It's not a virtue of our times. We tend a lot more towards it's important to be yourself and to do kind of what kind of is born out of your own heart and desires, and just to be authentic and true to yourself. There's something to be said for that, right? But sometimes, as Jesus says, what's in here isn't good, and it needs to be rooted out, and it needs to be put right. So I'd like to invite all of us, and maybe this is something that you already do or have done already, but sometime over the course of this week, to think about, is there something like a rule of life, a sort of order or structure that I could put in place in my life that would be helpful in my relationship with the Lord, in my pursuit of holiness. So I just want to offer a couple areas to think about, things that everyone has or should have in their life. The first one being prayer. So just simply, do I pray? And if I do, when? Whenever I just happen to think about God, but which may happen sometimes and may not happen other days? Or is there a certain time in my life that I set aside as time that belongs to God? So I like to pray in the morning and make it the first thing that I do every day. So is there a way that I could say, all right, I'm going to spend this intentional amount of time with God in the morning? There's lots of ways to do that. The rosary, reading the scriptures, or just simply talking to the Lord. But as part of a rule of life, to have an intentional amount of prayer built in, both individually and perhaps as a family as well. Another important thing is sleep. Sleep is good. And if we don't sleep, then nothing else in our life or in our brains or in our bodies really functions all that well. Is there a way that a certain discipline in that could be helpful. Recreation and exercise, certainly as well. Relationships, food. All of these things are important and they're simple, but when they're out of order in our life, it affects everything, including our spiritual life. Probably one of the biggest ones is media. The internet, TV, music, video games, you name it, various forms of entertainment, which none of which are bad in themselves. They can certainly be good. But again, if they're not ordered under the highest good, which is God himself and the pursuit of God, then they can create a certain kind of chaos in our life. You know, if you're playing Fortnite till 3 in the morning and you can't wake up for Mass in the morning, that's a problem. That's a disorder, and that's something that needs to change. I know half the people are like, a Fortnite's 2 weeks, right? Like, what are you talking about? And the other half are like, I love Fortnite. It's my favorite video game. It's a video game, for those of you who aren't aware what Fortnite is. It's a video game that if you have any grandchildren who are like middle school age, they could tell you all about. So, you know, there's things that can take a certain precedence in our life that really, they're not bad, but they don't belong in that spot. It doesn't belong playing 5 hours of video games a day or something like that. It's not the right thing. So what are these things that are present in my life, and how can they be ordered to this highest pursuit? I would encourage all of us to, especially if media and internet, social media, video games, whatever is a problem, I challenge you to try fasting from that for a week. No video games, no TV for a week. No Facebook, that kind of stuff, right? Instagram, whatever's the thing these days. I think you'll be surprised by how much space that creates in your life, by how much free time you have all of a sudden. But I would really encourage you to use some of that free time to start to build into your life a habit of prayer, if you don't already. The number one reason that we don't pray, including myself, is because we don't have enough time. And the number one reason we don't have enough time is because we make choices about how we spend our time, again, myself included, that don't lend towards pursuing that highest good. So, as I said, I'd invite you to consider a kind of rule of life or a way that you can structure your life around seeking the highest good. And if that involves maybe removing some things for a time, then do it and see what happens. See what happens when you make space for God to come in and to work and to purify us, to sanctify us. Not because that rule is the end goal, right? The rule is not the end goal. Jesus is the end goal. Intimacy with him is the end goal. Being a saint is the end goal. And above all, being a saint is what the world needs from each one of us.